The New Mexico desert holds many secrets, but none as unexpected as the one Jack Navarro discovers after the season's worst storm. A widowed rancher with calloused hands and a heart still raw from loss, Jack finds more than debris in the normally dry arroyo that crosses his land. There, among twisted branches and mud, lies a woman, injured, beautiful, and unlike anyone he's ever known. White Feather, exiled from her Apache band, carries wisdom as ancient as the mountains and a spirit as wild as the wind. Neither expects how their worlds will collide, creating something new from two broken paths. What begins as an act of simple humanity slowly transforms into something deeper, something neither dared hope for again. Will the sun born beneath the cottonwoods heal two wounded souls, or will the forces that tore them from their own worlds keep them forever apart? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jack Navarro adjusted his worn Stetson against the morning sun as he surveyed the fence line that needed mending. Another casualty of last night's storm. At 43, his face had weathered like the surrounding landscape, lined by sun, wind, and a grief that had settled into the creases around his eyes. The wedding ring hung against his chest on a silver chain, a weight he couldn't bear to remove even after 2 years. "Daddy, the school bus is coming." 8-year-old Elena called from the porch, her dark braids bouncing as she hopped from one foot to the other. Her backpack, decorated with hand-drawn horses, seemed almost too large for her slender frame. "Coming, Mia." His voice was gentle for her, always. He crossed the yard in long strides, boots kicking up dust that swirled in the morning light. Elena's eyes, so like Maria's, looked up at him with that familiar mixture of love and worry that no child her age should have to carry. "Did you make your lunch too?" Jack nodded, touched by her concern. Since Maria's accident, Elena had appointed herself his caretaker in small ways. "Yes, Mom. Bologna sandwich and an apple, just like you." As the yellow bus approached on the distant road, Jack knelt to her level. "Remember, Mrs. Gonzalez is bringing you home today. I've got to fix the south pasture fence before we lose any more cattle." Elena nodded solemnly. "Because of the storm. That's right. Be good now." He hugged her, breathing in the scent of the strawberry shampoo Maria had always used for her. Another small tradition he couldn't bear to change. The bus disappeared in a cloud of dust, leaving Jack alone with the vast silence of the ranch. 500 acres of struggling cattle operation just north of the Mescalero Apache Reservation. Once it had been a source of pride, the Navarro Ranch, passed down through 3 generations. Now it felt like a burden he carried alone, barely keeping afloat with cattle prices down and expenses mounting inside the modest ranch house. The calendar on the refrigerator, marked with Alana's school events and bill due dates, stared back at him. Maria's handwriting still marked some of the older notes. He hadn't been able to erase them. Jack poured the last of the morning coffee into his thermos and grabbed his tool belt. The radio droned about more storms expected by nightfall. Spring in New Mexico, feast or famine when it came to rain. The meteorologist warned it could be another gully washer, worse than last night's dot. As he drove his battered pickup across the property, Jack's mind wandered to the night that had changed everything. A rainy evening much like the one forecasted. Maria driving home from her night shift at the Silver City Hospital. The call at 3 a.m., the deputy sheriff's face at the door. The words "lost control" and "instantaneous" that were supposed to provide some comfort, but never could. The truck bounced over the rutted path toward the southern fence line, where the seasonal arroyo cut through his property. Normally dry most of the year, these desert washes could transform into raging rivers within minutes during a storm. Last night's downpour had been the first big one of the season. Jack parked near the damaged section. Posts had been washed out, wire tangled with debris branches, tumbleweeds, and something else caught his eye. Something out of place in the twisted wreckage of the fence. He climbed down from the truck, squinting against the glare. There, half buried, in mud and branches in the arroyo bed, was a splash of color that didn't belong among the desert browns and grays. Jack's heart quickened as he made his way down the eroded bank. Not someone. Whitefeather had walked for 3 days, following the old ways, listening to the land, watching the sky, letting the ancestors guide her feet. At 36, she carried herself with the quiet dignity that had been her grandmother's legacy. Her fingers instinctively found the small medicine pouch at her waist, its contents sacred. A hawk feather, a small piece of turquoise, a pinch of sacred pollen, and herbs known only to those trained in healing. The counsels. Words still echoed in her mind. You have broken tradition by questioning the new ways. Until you learn your place, you cannot remain. The elder's voice had been firm but tinged with regret. She had been his best student once. Whitefeather had trained since childhood to be a healer, learning the songs and ceremonies that brought balance to body and spirit. But when she had opposed the council's decision to allow the mining company onto sacred land, speaking out as a woman when tradition dictated silence, her position became untenable. Go until the moon has made its full journey 4 times. Elder had said, then we will speak again of your return. 2 moons had passed already, 2 more to endure before she could petition to return to her people. The Mescalero band had been her entire world, her identity, her purpose. Without them, she walked between worlds, belonging nowhere. Whitefeather adjusted the small pack on her shoulders. She had been following game trails, avoiding the highways, and towns where questions might be asked. The storm had caught her unprepared, driving her to seek shelter in the network of arroyos that carved through the desert landscape. She knew the danger. Every Apache child learned early about the deadly. Flash floods that could surge through these dry washes without warning. But night had been falling, the clouds growing heavier, and the arroyo bank offered protection from the wind that whipped across the open desert. The roar had come. Suddenly, a wall of water appearing around the bend, carrying branches, rocks, and debris. Whitefeather had scrambled up the steep bank, but the rain-softened earth gave way beneath her foot. The fall had been quick, the pain immediate as her ankle twisted and her head struck stone. Through the night, she had drifted in and out of consciousness, the cold rain soaking her clothes, the rising water threatening to carry her away. Only by wedging herself between boulders had she prevented being swept downstream that morning, brought pain and stillness. The storm had passed, leaving the arroyo floor strewn with evidence of its fury. Whitefeather assessed her injuries with a healer's detachment. The ankle sprained, possibly broken. The gash on her temple painful, but not life-threatening. The bigger concern was exposure and dehydration. Her water had been lost in the flood. Her pack remained, but sodden and mud-covered. She extracted a few soggy roots that could be chewed for their moisture, but knew they wouldn't sustain her long. Whitefeather closed her eyes, centering herself despite the pain. Her grandmother had taught her that fear was useless preparation, and wisdom were what kept one alive. She began to sing softly, a healing song to gather strength, to clear her mind, to connect with the spirits of Place Dot. The sun climbed higher, its heat beginning to bake the mud around her. Whitefeather knew she needed to move, to find water and better shelter, but each attempt to stand sent shooting pain through her ankle. She would need to fashion a walking stick to splint the injury. Dot as she reached for a broken branch near her resting place. A shadow fell across her face. Whitefeather looked up, squinting against the sun's glare, to see the silhouette of a man standing at the edge of the arroyo. Before darkness claimed her again, she heard him call out words she couldn't understand, in a language that was not her own. Jack scrambled down the arroyo's steep bank, boots sliding in the still damp soil. The woman lay half submerged in mud, her black hair spread out like a fan against the red earth. She wore traditional clothing, a long skirt, a cotton blouse with beadwork, all soaked and mud-stained. Apache, he guessed, from the nearby reservation. "Ma'am? Can you hear me?" Jack knelt beside her, noting the nasty gash on her temple, the awkward angle of her ankle. She stirred slightly at his voice, her eyelids fluttering, but remained unconscious. Jack reached for his cell phone, then remembered the futility. No reception out here, never was. The nearest hospital was 40 minutes away in Silver City, and his truck couldn't navigate the narrow arroyo. He'd have to carry her up to the road. He hesitated only briefly. Having an injured stranger in his home, an Apache woman no less, would certainly set tongues wagging in town. But leaving her wasn't an option. "I'm going to help you," he said, though she couldn't hear. "You're going to be okay." Jack pulled his father's old pocket knife from his jeans, the same one that had helped build this ranch 3 generations ago. He cut branches to create a makeshift stretcher, using his jacket and the branches to fashion a surface that could bear her weight. As he worked, Elena's school bus rumbled past on the distant road, Mrs. Gonzalez at the wheel. Jack waved, knowing Elena would be watching for him. The bus continued without stopping. They hadn't seen him down in the wash with the injured woman. Just as well, get the woman to safety first, then explain to Elena. Moving her onto the stretcher proved difficult. Though slender, she was dead weight, and Jack was careful not to jostle her injured ankle. As he lifted her, she moaned, eyes opening briefly, dark, pain-filled eyes that locked onto his for just a moment before closing again. The climb up the eroded bank was arduous, Jack's boots slipping in the mud as he dragged the makeshift stretcher. Sweat dripped from his brow, despite the cool spring air. At the top, he paused to catch his breath. Surveying his unexpected charge dot in the clear light, he could see she was perhaps in her mid-30s, her copper skin marked with lines of suffering, but also character. Not young, not old, a woman who had lived. Her hands, though dirty from the mud, showed the distinctive calluses of someone who worked with plants and herbs. Jack lifted her as gently as possible into the truck bed, arranging his old blanket around her for warmth and protection. From the metal ridges, the drive back to the ranch house was slow, each bump and dip causing him to wince in anticipation of her pain not at the house. He found Elena sitting on the porch with Mrs. Gonzalez, her math homework spread across her lap. Jack Navarro, what in heaven's name? Mrs. Gonzalez stood, her round face creased with concern as she spotted the woman in the truck bed. "Found her in the South Arroyo," Jack explained, already moving to the truck. "Must have been caught in last night's storm." Elena peered around him, eyes wide. "Is she dead, Daddy?" "No, Mia. Just hurt. Mrs. Gonzalez, could you call Doc Wilson? Tell him it's urgent." The older woman nodded, already heading inside to the phone. Elena followed Jack as he carefully lifted the woman from the truck. "She's pretty," Elena whispered, as Jack carried the unconscious woman toward the house. "Is she an Indian?" "Apache, I think," Jack replied, shouldering open the door to the guest bedroom, a room unused since Maria's mother had visited 3 Christmases ago. He laid the woman on the faded quilt, her dark hair stark against the white pillowcase. Elena hovered in the doorway. "Will she be okay?" Jack met his daughter's worried gaze. "I hope so, sweetheart." He reached into his pocket for his father's pocket knife, a familiar weight that had seen the family through countless emergencies. "I sure hope so." White Feather awoke to unfamiliar sensations, a soft mattress beneath her, the scent of coffee in the air, and the distant sound of a child's laughter. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light filtering through half-drawn curtains. Pain throbbed in her ankle and at her temple. This was not her home, not the reservation. Panic fluttered in her chest as she struggled to sit up. "Whoa there," came a deep voice from the doorway. "Better take it slow." The man who entered was tall, broad-shouldered, with the weathered face of someone who lived his life outdoors. A rancher by his clothing. His dark eyes held concern, but also wariness. "Where am I?" White Feather asked, her voice hoarse from thirst. "Navarro Ranch." He approached cautiously, as one might a wounded animal. "Found you in the arroyo after the storm. I'm Jack Navarro." White Feather's hand instinctively went to her waist, searching for her medicine pouch. It was gone. Her eyes widened in alarm. "Looking for this?" Jack reached for a small leather bag on the nightstand. It was still tied to your belt. Seemed important. She took it with trembling fingers, relief washing over her face. "Thank you. Doc Wilson's been by. Says your ankle's sprained? Not broken. That gash on your head needed stitches, though." White Feather's fingers found the neat line of sutures at her temple. "Doctor?" "Local physician. Old school country doctor. Known him all my life." Jack poured water from a pitcher. "Thought you might be thirsty." She accepted the glass, drinking deeply. "I need certain herbs for healing." Jack's eyebrow raised slightly. "Doc left some pain pills. My grandmother's herbs would be better." White Feather opened her medicine pouch, revealing a small collection of dried plants. "Could you bring me hot water?" "And a cup?" Jack hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." As he left, White Feather assessed her situation. Her clothes had been changed. She now wore a large man's shirt and soft cotton pants, both clean but faded. Her ankle was expertly wrapped. Someone had washed the mud from her hair and skin. A small face appeared in the doorway, a girl of perhaps 8, with dark braids and curious eyes. "Are you awake for real this time?" The child asked. "You talked in your sleep." "Daddy said it." Was Apache language. White Feather smiled despite her pain. "Yes, I'm awake. You must be Jack's daughter, Elena Navarro." The girl entered boldly, coming to stand by the bed. "Are you really an Indian?" "We learn about Apache people in school, but I never met one. I am Mescalero Apache. My name is White Feather." "That's pretty." Elena tilted her head. "How did you get in our arroyo?" "The storm caught me. I was traveling and needed shelter." Jack returned with a steaming mug. "Elena, don't bother our guest." "She's not bothering me," White Feather said, accepting the mug. She removed a pinch of herbs from her pouch, adding them to the hot water. A fragrant aroma filled the room. "This will help with pain and healing." "Smells like sage?" Jack guessed. "And other things. My grandmother taught me. She was a healer for our people." Elena watched with fascination. "Are you a healer too?" Shadow crossed White Feather's face. "I was." Jack seemed to sense her discomfort. "Elena, homework time. Let Miss White Feather rest." "But Daddy, now, Mia." Elena sighed dramatically, but obeyed, giving White Feather a small wave before leaving. Jack lingered awkwardly. "Doc says you shouldn't walk on that ankle for at least a week. You're welcome to stay until you're healed." White Feather studied him, trying to understand his motivation. "Why would you help a stranger? An Apache woman?" Jack shrugged, uncomfortable with the direct question. "Anyone would." "No," she said softly. "Not anyone." Their eyes met briefly before Jack looked away. "Rest. We'll talk more when you're stronger." After he left, White Feather sipped her herbal infusion, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this household, the child's distant voice reciting multiplication tables, dishes being washed, a radio playing soft country music. Sounds of family life. Sounds she had not heard since leaving her people. She closed her eyes, feeling the medicine begin to work, dulling the edges of her pain. For now, she was safe. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. 3 days passed in an awkward dance of politeness. Jack brought meals on trays, checked on Whitefeather's ankle, and disappeared to his ranch work. Elena, however, found every excuse to visit their guest, peppering Whitefeather with questions about Apache life that the woman answered with patient amusement. By the fourth morning, Whitefeather had enough of confinement. Using a wooden cane Jack had fashioned, she made her way to the kitchen, her ankle still tender but bearable. Jack looked up from his coffee, surprise evident. "Should you be walking? I've rested enough." Whitefeather eased herself into a chair at the warm oak table. "I should earn my keep while I'm here." Jack frowned. "You don't need to. Please." Her voice was firm. "Where I come from, everyone contributes." A moment of understanding passed between them. Jack nodded. "Fair enough." Elena bounded in from her bedroom, backpack in hand, stopping short at the sight of Whitefeather at the table. "You're up." "Good morning, little one." Whitefeather smiled at the child's enthusiasm. "Can Whitefeather make my lunch today, Daddy?" "Please?" Jack glanced at his guest, who nodded. "All right. Bus comes in 20 minutes. As Jack left to check on a pregnant heifer, Elena pulled a battered book from a kitchen drawer and placed it before Whitefeather. "This was my mom's. She used to make the best lunches." Whitefeather opened the recipe book carefully, noting the handwritten notes in the margins, the splashes of ingredients that told of actual use. "Your mother is no longer here." Elena's face clouded. "She died in a car crash 2 years ago." "I'm sorry, little one." Whitefeather gently touched the child's hand. "The ones we love never truly leave us." "That's what Daddy says too, but he still gets sad." Elena leaned closer, whispering. "Sometimes I hear him crying at night." Whitefeather's heart tightened. She turned the pages of Maria's recipe book, stopping at a simple quesadilla recipe with Elena's favorite, scrawled in the margin. "Shall we make this for your lunch?" Elena nodded eagerly, and together they prepared the meal, the child chattering about school and friends, while Whitefeather listened attentively. As Elena left on the school bus, Whitefeather remained at the kitchen window, watching until the yellow vehicle disappeared around a bend. "She likes you." Whitefeather turned to find Jack in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "She is a good child. You've raised her well." Jack moved to pour more coffee, offering her a cup. "Her mother did most of that. I'm just trying not to mess it up. Grief is a long path." Whitefeather accepted the coffee. "In my tradition, we believe it takes 4 seasons for a soul to find its new place." Jack stiffened slightly at the mention of spiritual beliefs different from his own. "Well, in my experience, some things just stay broken." An uncomfortable silence fell between them, broken by the ringing of the telephone. Jack answered, his expression darkening as he listened. "Gonzales told you what?" He glanced at Whitefeather. "It's not like that, Tom. No, she's injured. Mind your own business." He hung up with more force than necessary. "That was the feed store owner. Word's gotten around that I've got an Apache. Woman staying here. Mrs. Gonzales has been talking. I should leave." Whitefeather straightened. "I don't wish to cause trouble. Where would you go? Your ankle's still healing, and the reservation is 20 miles away." Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Look, people will talk no matter what. Been that way since Maria died. Let them." That evening, as Whitefeather helped prepare dinner, her movements still slow but determined, Elena brought out a school assignment. "We're supposed to interview someone from a different culture." Her eyes were hopeful. "Could I interview you, Whitefeather?" Before the woman could respond, Jack intervened. "Elena, that's not appropriate." "I would be honored," Whitefeather said quietly, "but perhaps your father is right. The other children's parents might not understand." Elena's face fell. "Because you're Apache?" The blunt question hung in the air. Whitefeather met Jack's troubled gaze over the child's head. "Yes," she answered honestly. "Some people fear what is different." That's stupid, Elena declared. Elena Maria Navarro, Jack warned, though his eyes held a glint of agreement. Later, when Elena was asleep, Whitefeather found Jack on the porch, staring at the stars. You have a difficult position, she said. I understand. Jack sighed heavily. This town has a long memory for old conflicts. But that doesn't make it right. Whitefeather nodded, accepting the complexity of their situation. Tomorrow, I will help more. My hands are strong, even if my ankle is not. Jack looked at her then, really looked at her, seeing not just an Apache woman, but a person of dignity and resilience. Thank you. The morning dawned clear and warm, a perfect New Mexico spring day. Whitefeather sat cross-legged in the yard, her hands working clay with practiced movements. Elena watched, fascinated, as a simple water pot took shape between the woman's nimble fingers. Why doesn't it fall apart? Elena asked, kneeling beside her. The clay remembers, Whitefeather explained. It holds the memory of the earth and water that formed it. Our hands just help it find its shape again. Jack observed from the porch, coffee mug in hand, his expression a mixture of curiosity and caution. A week had passed since he'd found Whitefeather in the arroyo. Her ankle was healing well, but she showed no signs of wanting to leave, and strangely, he wasn't in a hurry to see her go. This pot, Whitefeather continued, will be used to collect rainwater. The Apache believe water holds memory too. Rain remembers its journey from the clouds, through the air, to the earth. Does it remember people? Elena asked softly. Whitefeather's hands paused. She understood the real question behind the child's words. Yes, little one. Water remembers those. It has touched. That is why the rain sometimes makes us think of those who are no longer with us. Elena nodded, accepting this explanation with the simple faith of childhood. Can I try? Whitefeather guided Elena's small hands on the clay, showing her how to feel its consistency, how to work with its natural properties rather than against them. Jack watched the gentle interaction, something shifting in his chest, an easing of a tightness he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it wasn't natural. Later that afternoon, Whitefeather accompanied Jack to check on a calf that had been failing to thrive. The rancher had been administering antibiotics, but the young animal remained listless, refusing to nurse properly. May I? Whitefeather knelt beside the calf, her hands gentle as they examined the animal. Jack shrugged. Nothing else is working. Whitefeather opened her medicine pouch, removing a small bundle of herbs. She crushed them between her palms, whispering words Jack couldn't understand, then mixed the herbs with a little water from her newly crafted clay pot. This will ease the inflammation, she explained, coaxing the mixture into the calf's mouth. The problem is in the belly, not the lungs. Jack raised an eyebrow. Doc Wilson thought it was pneumonia. Your doctor treats symptoms he can see. Sometimes we must listen to what cannot be seen. She stroked the calf's neck. By morning, he will be stronger. Jack wanted to dismiss her confidence as superstition, but there was something in her certainty that gave him pause. I guess we'll see. That evening, Elena asked Whitefeather about Apache stories. The three sat on the porch, the desert sunset painting the landscape in fiery oranges and deep purples. My grandmother told stories of changing women, Whitefeather began, her voice taking on a rhythmic quality. She taught us that life moves in cycles, like the seasons. Nothing remains the same forever, not joy, not sorrow. Elena leaned against her father. Even being sad about Mom? Jack tensed, but Whitefeather answered gently. Even that, little one. The sharpest grief softens, like edges of stone in a river. It doesn't disappear, but it changes form. Is that why you have that special place with Mom's picture? Elena asked Jack, to help remember her differently? Jack swallowed hard. He hadn't realized Elena knew about the small altar he kept in his bedroom, Maria's photograph, her rosary, the dried wedding bouquet. Your father honors your mother's memory, Whitefeather said when Jack couldn't answer. We Apache build spirit houses for the same purpose. Places where memories can live. Do Apache people believe in heaven? Elena's questions were relentless, seeking connections between her world and Whitefeather's. We believe those who have walked on continue their journey in the spirit world, Whitefeather explained. Not so different from your heaven, perhaps. Jack stood abruptly. Bedtime, Elena. After tucking his daughter in, Jack returned to find Whitefeather still on the porch, gazing at the stars. I'm sorry if those questions were difficult, she said without looking at him. She's never talked about Maria's death so openly before. Jack's voice was rough with emotion. Not even with me. Children often find it easier to ask difficult questions of strangers. Jack sat beside her, the night sounds of the desert filling the space between them. That calf, how did you know? Whitefeather smiled slightly. Some knowledge comes from listening more than seeing. For the first time since she'd arrived, Jack felt something shift between them, a tentative bridge forming across the divide of their different worlds. Jack's ancient pickup truck rattled down the main street of Cooper's Crossing. Population 1,892. 2 weeks had passed since he'd found Whitefeather, and necessity finally forced a trip to town. They needed supplies, and Jack had bills to pay at the bank. You sure about this? He asked, glancing at Whitefeather in the passenger seat. She wore her own clothes, now cleaned and mended, her long black hair in a traditional braid. I've faced worse than small-town stairs, she replied, though her hands tightly clasped the medicine pouch in her lap. Elena bounced excitedly in the middle seat. Can we get ice cream after the store, Daddy? We'll see, Mia. Jack parked in front of Miller's General Store, aware of heads turning as Whitefeather stepped from the truck. Inside, the usual Saturday morning bustle quieted noticeably. Jack nodded to familiar faces, most of whom returned the gesture with varying degrees of warmth. Whitefeather kept her eyes forward, her back straight, dignity in every movement. Jack Navarro, Herb Miller greeted from behind the counter. Heard you've had some excitement out at your place. His gaze slid to Whitefeather and back. Just helping a neighbor in need, Herb. Jack handed over his supply list. She was caught in that big storm a couple weeks back. Neighbor, huh? Herb's tone suggested he knew the reservation was 20 miles in the opposite direction from Jack's ranch. While Herb gathered their order, Elena tugged Whitefeather toward the candy display. Jack noticed Mrs. Peterson and her bridge club watching, whispering behind their hands. He felt a flush of anger rising, but tamped it down. Daddy, can I get Skittles? Elena called. 1 small pack, he answered, moving to the register as Herb tallied the supplies. The store's bell jangled as 3 men entered, the Cotter brothers and Jim Randall, all ranchers from the South Valley. They stopped short, taking in the scene. Well, look here, drawled Mike Cotter. Jack's gone and got himself an Indian princess. Jack stiffened. That's enough, Mike. Just making conversation. Mike approached the counter, deliberately standing too close to Whitefeather. You got a name, princess? Whitefeather met his gaze calmly. My name is Whitefeather. I am Mescalero Apache. Ooh, hear that, boys? Mescalero. Mike's mockery was clear. My granddaddy had some stories about Mescalero raids. Took his sister. They did. That was a different time, Whitefeather replied evenly. Mike, back off, Jack warned, stepping between them. We're just here for supplies. The tension was broken by Sheriff Tom Rivera's entrance. The sheriff took in the situation with experienced eyes. Everything all right here, folks? He asked, his hand resting casually on his belt near his holster. Just fine, Sheriff, Herb answered quickly. Jack was just paying his bill. Tom nodded to Jack. Good to see you in town. Been too long. Jack recognized the lifeline his old friend was throwing him. Been busy, Tom. You know how it is. The sheriff turned to White Feather. "Ma'am, don't believe we've met. Tom Rivera." "White Feather." She inclined her head respectfully. "You visiting our town low?" The question seemed casual, but Jack knew better. "She's staying at my place while her ankle heals," Jack explained. "Found her caught in that flash flood couple weeks back." Understanding dawned in Tom's eyes. He nodded. "Well, welcome to Cooper's Crossing, ma'am. Hope our town treats you better than that storm did." The subtle message to the onlookers wasn't lost on anyone. The Cotter brothers retreated to the hardware section. Muttering dot as they loaded supplies into the truck, Elena tugged at Jack's sleeve. "Daddy, those men were mean to White Feather." "Why?" Jack glanced at White Feather, who was carefully arranging bags in the truck bed, her face composed, but her movements stiff with tension. "Some people fear what they don't understand, Mia," he answered quietly. "That's stupid," Elena declared, loudly enough for several passers-by to hear. White Feather's lips twitched in a suppressed smile. "Sheriff." Rivera approached as they prepared to leave. "Jack, might be best to head straight home today." "Ice cream another time." Jack nodded, understanding the warning. "Thanks, Tom." As they drove out of town, White Feather stared straight ahead. "Your friend, the sheriff, he's Mexican-American?" "Yeah, known Tom since grade school. Good man. He understands what it means to be seen as different," she observed. Jack glanced at her profile, struck by her composure after the confrontation. "I'm sorry about what happened back there. It is not your burden to carry." White Feather finally turned to him. "But thank you for standing beside me." Elena, sandwiched between them, reached for White Feather's hand. "I'm going to tell my teacher that Mike Cotter is ignorant. Mrs. Bentley says that's what you call people who don't try to learn about others." Despite everything, Jack found himself smiling. "Mrs. Bentley sounds like a wise woman." "She's Navajo," Elena said proudly. "She wears pretty turquoise jewelry, like White Feather's medicine pouch." The old truck rumbled homeward, carrying them away from town and back to the relative safety of the rancher place that somehow had begun to feel like a sanctuary for all three of them. April gave way to May, the desert blooming in brief, spectacular color after the spring rains. White Feather's ankle had healed completely, yet she remained at the ranch, her presence now woven into the daily fabric of their lives. One morning, she stood at the edge of a neglected garden plot behind the house. Overgrown with weeds, it had clearly once been tended with care. A rusted trowel lay half-buried near a crumbling border of stones. "That was Maria's garden," Jack said, startling her. He'd approached silently, his expression somber. "Haven't had the heart to touch it since ... May I?" White Feather asked softly. Jack hesitated, then nodded. She'd hate seeing it like this. That afternoon, White Feather began the work of reclamation. Elena joined after school, the two of them pulling weeds, turning soil, and discovering perennials struggling beneath the neglect. "Mom loved sunflowers best," Elena explained, carefully working around a cluster of green shoots. "And marigolds, to keep bugs away from her tomatoes." "Your mother was wise," White Feather replied. "In our traditions, we plant corn, beans, and squash together, the three sisters. Each helps the others grow strong." From the barn, Jack watched them work, something tight in his chest slowly unwinding. White Feather moved with purpose, her hands strong and certain in the earth. Not trying to erase Maria's garden, but bringing it back to life. Over the next weeks, White Feather divided her time between the garden and helping Jack with ranch work. She had a way with the animals that bordered on uncanny sensing ailments. Before symptoms appeared, calming nervous horses with whispered Apache words. Jack found himself sharing more of the ranch's operations with her, valuing her observations and suggestions. Her traditional knowledge of seasonal patterns and sustainable practices often aligned with the wisdom his grandfather had passed down knowledge. Jack had sometimes ignored in favor of modern methods that promised quicker results. The old ones. New. Whitefeather told him as they repaired fencing along the east pasture. They watched the land through many seasons. They learned what the earth was telling them. Jack nodded, remembering his grandfather saying something similar. My grandfather used to claim he could predict rain 3 days out just by watching how the cattle behaved. He was listening, Whitefeather said simply as dusk approached. Jack caught his hand on a barbed wire strand, slicing his palm deeply. He cursed, blood flowing freely down his wrist. Let me see. Whitefeather took his hand without hesitation, examining the wound. We need to clean this. At the house, she sat him at the kitchen table and gathered supplies, warm water, clean cloths, and herbs from her medicine pouch. Her touch was gentle, but firm as she washed away the blood and dirt. Probably needs stitches, Jack muttered, wincing. Perhaps not. Whitefeather crushed dried herbs between her fingers, mixing them with a small amount of honey from the pantry. This will draw out infection and help the skin close. As she worked, Jack found himself studying her face, the fine lines around. Her eyes, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows, the fullness of her lips as she whispered traditional healing words. Her hands on his were warm, capable, comforting. There, she said finally, wrapping his palm with a clean bandage. Keep it dry tonight. Their eyes met across the small distance between them. Jack became acutely aware that she still held his hand, their fingers now loosely intertwined on the tabletop. Whitefeather, he began, not knowing what he meant to say. I should check on Elena, she said suddenly, releasing his hand and standing. She was going to water the garden before dark. Alone in the kitchen, Jack flexed his bandaged hand, feeling the sharp sting beneath the dull throb pain cutting through numbness. Like life pushing through grief. Later that night, he stood at his bedroom window, watching Whitefeather sitting alone on the porch steps, her face turned toward the stars. The moonlight silvered her black hair and caught the edges of her profile. Something stirred in him that had been dormant for 2 years, a feeling he'd believed buried with Maria. The realization both terrified and exhilarated him. This woman from a different world, with her quiet strength and ancient wisdom, had somehow slipped past his defenses. Jack touched the wedding ring that still hung around his neck, feeling the cool metal against his fingertips. For the first time since Maria's death, he unfastened the chain, carefully placed the ring in his dresser drawer, and closed it gently. Outside, Whitefeather continued her silent communion with the night sky, unaware of the small but significant ceremony taking place inside a man tentatively opening himself to the possibility of a future different from the one he had planned. Alana's scream pierced the pre-dawn darkness, jolting Jack from sleep. He found his daughter thrashing in her bed, tears streaming down her face. Mia, wake up, he urged, gathering her into his arms. It's just a dream. Elena clung to him, sobbing. You were gone like Mama. I couldn't find you anywhere. I'm right. Here, Jack murmured, rocking her gently. I'm not going anywhere. Whitefeather appeared in the doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders, concern etched on her face. Is she all right? Elena reached for her. I had the bad dream again. Jack moved aside as Whitefeather sat on the bed, taking Elena's small hands in hers. The dream that chases you comes from fear, little one. Sometimes we must face it to make it leave. How? Elena hiccuped. In my tradition, we make dream catchers to filter bad dreams from good. Whitefeather brushed the hair from Elena's damp forehead. Would you like to make one tomorrow? Elena nodded, her breathing calming. Will it really work? The dream catcher is a reminder of your own strength, Whitefeather explained. It works because you believe it will. After Elena had fallen back asleep, Jack and Whitefeather stood in the hallway, their voices low. These nightmares started after Maria died, Jack explained. Doctor said it's normal, but ... He ran a hand through his hair. I hate feeling so helpless. Children often carry our unspoken fears, White Feather said. She senses your worry about leaving her alone, as her mother did. The simple truth of this observation struck Jack silent. White Feather touched his arm briefly before returning to her room, leaving him with thoughts that kept him awake until dawn. The next afternoon, White Feather gathered materials for the dreamcatcher: a willow branch, sinew, beads, and feathers. She and Elena sat at the kitchen table, the child watching intently as White Feather bent the branch into a circle. The circle represents the path of the sun and moon across the sky. White Feather explained, securing the ends with sinew. Now we weave the web inside, like a spider's web that catches things. Elena's small fingers struggled with the delicate work, but White Feather guided her patiently. Jack observed from the doorway, struck by the image they made heads bent. Together, Elena's dark braids and White Feather's flowing black hair, 4 hands working as one. In the center we leave a space, White Feather continued. Bad dreams are caught in the web, but good dreams know the way through the hole. Like magic? Elena asked. Like wisdom, White Feather corrected gently. The old ones knew that. What we believe shapes what we see. Jack stepped into the kitchen. My grandmother had something similar, a cross, woven from palm leaves blessed on Palm Sunday. She hung it over my bed when I was a boy. White Feather nodded. Many traditions have sacred protections for children. The symbols differ, but the love behind them is the same. As they finished the dream catcher, adorning it with beads and 2 eagle feathers White Feather had carried in her medicine pouch, Elena asked, "Can we show it to Mom?" A heavy silence followed. Jack cleared his throat. You mean at the cemetery? Elena nodded. White Feather said Mom's spirit might still hear us sometimes. Jack glanced at White Feather, a flash of the old uneasiness returning. Catholic doctrine and Apache spirituality made uneasy bedfellows in his mind. White Feather met his gaze steadily. I told Elena that many traditions believe our loved ones remain connected to us, even after death. But how you honor Maria's memory is for you to decide. Jack saw the hope in his daughter's eyes. We could go tomorrow, he said finally. It's been a while since we visited Mom. The following morning, they drove to the small cemetery outside town. Maria's grave lay beneath a mesquite tree, her headstone simple. Maria Elena Navarro, beloved wife and mother, always in our hearts. Elena placed a small bouquet of flowers from the garden her mother had planted. Look, Mama, White Feather helped me make these grow again. Jack knelt beside his daughter, his hand on the cool stone. He had avoided this place for months, finding the finality too painful. But today, with Elena chattering to her mother about school and her dream catcher, with White Feather standing respectfully a few paces back, the visit felt differentless, like reopening a wound, more like acknowledging a truth. When Elena finished, White Feather approached, placing a small bundle of sage near the headstone. She whispered words in Apache, then made the sign of the cross, a gesture Jack recognized from his own Catholic upbringing. The simple act of respect, bridging their different traditions, touched him deeply. As they walked back to the truck, Jack found himself between the 2 females, a hand held by each his past, and perhaps his future connected through him. In this moment of shared reverence, the Cooper's Crossing Spring Festival had been a town. Tradition since 1912. Main Street transformed with colorful booths, a bandstand in the square, and streamers fluttering from lampposts. Jack hadn't attended since Maria's death, the festivities too painful, a reminder of happier times. We don't have to go, he told Elena as she bounced excitedly at breakfast. Plenty to do around the ranch. But Mrs. Bentley said I could help. At the Cultural Heritage booth, Elena protested. And White Feather has never seen our festival. Jack glanced at White Feather, who was carefully neutral. You want to face those people again? After what happened at the store? I have lived with far worse than small-town whispers, she replied quietly. But this is your decision. It is your community. Something in her tone, the gentle acknowledgement that she remained an outsider, made Jack's mind up for him. All right, we'll go. But we leave at the first sign of trouble. Elena whooped with delight, running to change into her special outfit, a ruffled skirt and embroidered blouse that Maria had bought for last year's festival. Never worn until now. Later, as Jack waited by the truck, White Feather emerged from the house. She had dressed in her finest traditional Apache attire, a deerskin dress adorned with intricate beadwork, her hair plaited with thin leather cords and turquoise beads. A silver concho belt caught the sunlight at her waist. Jack's breath caught. You look appropriate for a festival, she finished for him, a hint of amusement in her eyes at his loss for words. The town square buzzed with activity when they arrived. Elena immediately spotted Mrs. Bentley, her Navajo teacher, waving from a booth displaying indigenous crafts and educational materials. I see my student has arrived, Mrs. Bentley called warmly, and brought distinguished company. She nodded respectfully to White Feather. Mescalero, yes? I recognized the beadwork patterns. Yes. White Feather seemed surprised at the welcome. You have a good eye. My grandmother traded with Mescalero women. Mrs. Bentley gestured to her booth. Would you honor us by joining our cultural display? The children should learn about more than just Navajo traditions. As White Feather was drawn into conversation with Mrs. Bentley, Jack found himself surrounded by ranch friends he hadn't seen in months. Good to see you out, Jack, said Bill Peterson, clapping him on the shoulder. We've missed you at the cattlemen's. Meetings. Been busy, Jack replied, the standard excuse. So I hear. Bill's gaze drifted to White Feather, now showing a group of children how to identify natural dyes in traditional textiles. Tom Rivera filled me in, said she's quite something. Jack tensed, preparing for judgment, but Bill surprised him. Mary says it's high time you rejoin the living. Maria would have wanted that. Before Jack could respond, Mayor Collins took the bandstand, announcing the official opening of the festival. Carnival games commenced, food stalls opened, and the local band struck up a lively tune. The day passed with unexpected ease. Some townspeople kept their distance, but others, particularly those who had known Jack all his life, made efforts to welcome White Feather. Elena flitted between the cultural booth and the games, proudly introducing White Feather to her school friends as our special friend who lives with us. Trouble arrived as evening fell and the dancing began. The Cotter brothers, well into their cups, approached as Jack and White Feather watched Elena play a ring-toss game. Well, if it ain't the happy little family, Mike Cotter drawled, loud enough for nearby heads to turn. Jack stepped forward. Move along, Mike. Not tonight. Free country, ain't it? Mike swayed slightly. Just wondering when you started preferring squaws to decent women. Plenty of widows would have had you, Jack. A crowd was gathering. Jack's fists clenched, but before he could respond, Sheriff Rivera materialized. That's enough, Mike. Your brother looks like he could use help getting home. Mike sneered, but backed down under the sheriff's steady gaze. As they stumbled away, Jack turned to White Feather. I'm sorry, we should go. No. Her voice was firm. That would give power to their words. She extended her hand as the band began a slow waltz. Dance with me, Jack Navarro. Her boldness surprised him. Taking her hand, he led her to the wooden dance floor where other couples moved beneath strung lights. They drew stares, the widowed rancher and the Apache woman, but Jack found he didn't care. White Feather moved with natural grace, following his lead as if they had danced together for years. The beads in her hair caught the light as she looked up at him. Your town is watching, she murmured. Let them, Jack replied, his arm tightening around her waist dot as the music played on. Elena watched from beside Mrs. Bentley, a smile spreading across her face. And across the square, Sheriff Rivera raised his cup in silent toast to his old friend A. Man finally finding his way back to life. June brought the monsoon season to New Mexico afternoon skies, darkening without warning. Thunder rolling across. The desert like drums, rain falling in sheets that turned dry arroyos into rushing rivers. Within minutes, Jack tracked the storm clouds, gathering on the western horizon as he and Whitefeather repaired the roof of the old equipment barn. Elena was spending the night at a friend's house in town, her first sleepover since Maria's death. A small victory in healing. We should finish up, Jack called over the rising wind. This one's coming fast. Whitefeather nodded, gathering tools as the first fact drops began to fall. They had just reached the barn door when the sky opened, rain cascading down in a silver curtain that cut visibility to mere feet. Looks like we're waiting this one out, Jack said, closing the heavy door against the downpour. The sudden dimness. Inside the barn was broken only by shafts of gray light from the high windows and an old kerosene lantern Jack lit with practiced hands. Thunder cracked directly overhead, making the barn timbers shudder. Whitefeather settled on a hay bale, her expression contemplative as she watched the rain hammer against the windows. In our tradition, this is thunder moon time, she said, when the sky beings remind us of their power. My grandfather called. These gully washers, Jack replied, sitting across from her. Said they were the desert taking a long drink after months of thirst. Whitefeather smiled at the comparison. Your grandfather understood the land's language. They fell silent, listening to the storm's fury. There was a strange intimacy in being trapped together. Jack realized no Elena's buffer, no ranch work to focus on. Just the two of them, and the rain sealing them away from the world. You have lived on this land all your life? Whitefeather asked, breaking the silence. Jack nodded. Born in the same bedroom Elena sleeps in now. Third generation Navarro, on this ranch. You know its heartbeat then? Its seasons and moods. I suppose I do. Jack had never thought of his connection to the land that way, but she was right. The ranch was more than property to him. It was identity, legacy, belonging. Like I once knew the reservation, Whitefeather said softly. Before my exile, the word hung between them. Though she had lived at the ranch for nearly 2 months, Whitefeather rarely spoke of her banishment, or when it might end. Do you miss it? Jack asked. Your people? Every day. Her honesty was direct, unflinching. But I have found unexpected peace here. Their eyes met across the lantern light. Acknowledgement of something neither had put into words. Another crack of thunder. Closer now. Whitefeather tensed almost imperceptibly. You're afraid of storms, Jack realized, surprised. Not afraid, respectful. But her hands were tightly clasped. The night I was caught in the arroyo, I thought the water spirits had come for me. Jack moved to sit beside her on the hay bale, their shoulders almost touching. Want to know a secret? I'm afraid of hospitals. Ever since the night Maria... He stopped, the familiar tightness gripping his chest. Whitefeather waited, not pushing. It was raining, like tonight, Jack continued finally. She was driving home from her shift at the hospital. Wet road, sharp curve. They said she died instantly. You never told me how she passed, Whitefeather said gently. I never told anyone the whole story. Jack swallowed hard. I was supposed to pick her up that night, but Elena had a fever. I asked Maria to take a cab, but she said she'd be fine. If I had just ... Jack. Whitefeather's hand found his in the semi-darkness. The spirits choose our time to walk on. Not you. The simple certainty in her voice broke something in him. 2 years of guilt, of what-ifs that had circled endlessly in his mind, met her absolute conviction that some things were beyond human control. "How can you be so sure?" he whispered. "Because I have seen it. Death comes when it will not, because we deserve punishment or made a small choice. That is the truth my grandmother taught me." Outside, the storm's fury began to ease, the rain softening to a steady patter. Inside, Jack turned to face White Feather, seeing her clearly perhaps for the first time, not as an Apache woman, not as Elena's surrogate mother, but simply as herself. A woman of strength and wisdom who had walked into his life as unexpectedly as the flash flood that had brought her. Their first kiss was hesitant, a question rather than a declaration. The second was an answer. And as the storm passed over them, moving eastward across the desert, they found in each other a shelter more lasting than the barn's sturdy walls. The plain white envelope bore no return address. Jack found it in the mailbox at the end of the drive, mixed in with bills and the weekly cattleman's journal. He might have opened it immediately if Elena hadn't been chattering about her school day, if the evening chores hadn't been waiting. Instead, it sat forgotten on the kitchen counter. Until after dinner, when White Feather noticed it as she cleared the plates. "This was not opened," she said, handing it to Jack. He tore it absently, expecting a flyer or local notice. The single sheet of paper inside bore a message in block letters, cut from magazines and pasted in uneven rows. "Indians belong on the reservation out. In white men's beds remember your wife. Think of your dear Jack's face hardened as he crumpled the paper. White Feather gently took it from his fist, smoothing it to read. "I should have expected this," she said quietly. Word travels fast in small towns. It had been 3 weeks since the storm, since everything between them had changed. 3 weeks of stolen moments, of learning each other, of a happiness Jack had not dared hope for again. Elena had noticed the shift immediately, her young eyes missing nothing, her approval clear in her wide smiles, and the drawings she made of the three, of them together. But beyond their fence line, reactions were mixed at best, hostile at worst. Miss Navarro needs to focus more on her schoolwork and less on her home situation. Elena's teacher had told Jack at pickup the previous day, her pinched expression making clear her disapproval. At the feed store, conversation stopped when Jack entered, resuming in hushed tones once he'd passed. Sheriff Rivera had pulled him aside after church on Sunday. "Just a heads up, Jack," Ton had said, his voice low. "Some folks are talking about calling child services, saying Elena's living situation is culturally confusing. That's ridiculous," Jack had sputtered. "She's thriving. Her nightmares have almost stopped. Her grades are up. I know that." Tom's hand on his shoulder was sympathetic but firm. "I'm on your side. Just be prepared." Now, facing the anonymous threat in his own kitchen, Jack felt a surge of protective anger. "I'll call Tom. This crosses a line. It would be difficult to prove who sent it." White Feather's practicality was colored by resignation, as if such treatment were expected. "I won't have you threatened in your own home." Jack reached for the phone. "Is this my home, Jack?" Her question was gentle but direct. "We have never spoken of what this is between us, how long it might last." The phone forgotten, Jack turned to her. "You know how I feel. I know we have found comfort in each other. I know Elena loves having a woman's presence again." White Feathers' eyes held his steadily. "But I also know I was meant to return to my people when the 4 moons had passed. And now? Do you still want that?" Instead of answering directly, White Feather took his hand and placed it on her abdomen. "The decision is more complicated now." Jack's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You're pregnant?" She nodded, her expression a complex mixture of joy and uncertainty. The old women would say Thunder Moon is a powerful time for new beginnings. A child, his child. The possibility had never occurred to him at 43. With a failed marriage before Maria and then widowhood, he'd assumed his family was complete with Elena. Say something, Jack. White Feather's voice held a rare note of vulnerability. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, his emotions too tangled for immediate words. Another child. A half Apache child who would bear the Navarro name, but also carry White Feather's heritage. A child who would face prejudice from both communities. We'll figure this out, he said finally. Together. White Feather stepped back, her hand still in his. Your community will not easily accept this. And my people ... double quote, she hesitated. A child of mixed blood would not be fully welcomed by some. Then, we make our own community, Jack said firmly. Starting right here. As if summoned by the intensity of their conversation, Elena appeared in the kitchen doorway, her math homer clutched in one hand. Dad, I need help with fractions. The normalcy of the request grounded them both. This was what mattered, the family they were building, the love that had found them against all odds. Later that night, after Elena was asleep, Jack placed the threatening letter in the fireplace, watching the hateful words curl and blacken in the flames. They won't win, he promised White Feather as she stood beside him. Not this time. She leaned against him, one hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. Every child born is a victory, Jack, even in difficult times. The old truck that pulled into the ranch yard bore the dust of many miles. Jack watched from the porch as an elderly Apache man emerged, his silver hair tied back with a leather cord, his weathered face dignified beneath a black hat adorned with a beaded band. Most striking was the carved wooden staff he carried. Its surface etched with symbols Jack didn't recognize, topped with feathers and wrapped in places with colored cloth. White Feather emerged from the garden, freezing at the sight of the visitor. Her hand instinctively went to her abdomen, though her condition wasn't yet visible at 3 months. Grandfather, she said, approaching with her head slightly bowed. The old man nodded once. White Feather. His English was accented, but clear. It has been many moons. Jack stepped forward, extending his hand. Jack Navarro, welcome to my ranch. The elder regarded Jack's hand for a moment before accepting it. I am Joseph Running Bear, elder of the Mescalero band. I have come to speak with the one who was sent away. They settled in the living room, an awkward triangle of tension. White Feather served coffee in silence, her usual confidence subdued in the elder's presence. The council has been reconsidering your situation, Running Bear said finally. The mining company we allowed onto our land has broken their promises. The sacred spring is now contaminated. White Feather's eyes widened. The healing waters? But that source has been pure for generations. No longer. Running Bear's mouth tightened. You spoke against this partnership. You warned that the outsiders would not respect our ways. Many voices spoke against it, White Feather said carefully. I was not alone in my concerns. But you were loudest, and a woman. The elder sipped his coffee. This was your offense. Yet now, some say your voice was the one we should have heeded. Jack watched the exchange with growing understanding. White Feather's exile had been political punishment for challenging tribal leadership and traditional gender roles, not for any moral failing. So she can return to the reservation? Jack asked, trying to keep his voice neutral despite the sudden heaviness in his chest. Running Bear studied him. You are the one who found her after the storm, who took her into your home. Yes, and now she carries your child. Jack blinked in surprise. They had told no one but Elena about the pregnancy. A hint of a smile touched the elder's lined face. I have been a healer for 67 years, young man. I can see what is written in a woman's eyes, in the way she holds herself. White Feather met the elder's gaze directly. It is true. I carry Jack's child. Running Bear nodded slowly. This complicates matters. A child of mixed blood would be a bridge between worlds, White Feather finished. Like the children of many unions before. The old ways are struggling, Whitefeather. Running Bear's voice softened. Our young people leave for the cities. Our language fades. Some on the council believe we must keep what is ours pure and separate to survive. And what do you believe, grandfather? Whitefeather asked. The elder was silent for a long moment. I believe that what does not adapt will perish. I believe your voice is needed among us again, especially now. He glanced at Jack. But your heart has found a new place. The simple observation landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the room. Whitefeather looked at Jack, her dark eyes conflicted. I will speak for you to the council, Running Bear continued. Your exile can end when the child is born. You could return as a healer, bringing your skills back to our people who need them greatly. He paused. The child would be welcome too, eventually. And Jack? Whitefeather asked. Running Bear shrugged slightly. He would be tolerated, as one who helped our daughter in need. But he would always be an outsider. Jack absorbed this, understanding the choice being presented. Whitefeather could return to her people, her position as healer restored, their child accepted, but he would remain peripheral, a visitor rather than family. There is another path, Running Bear added, seeming to read Jack's thoughts. Whitefeather could remain here, visit the reservation to teach and heal when needed, bring the child to learn our ways. Not fully returned, but not fully exiled. A bridge, Whitefeather murmured, echoing her earlier words. Running Bear nodded, then rose with the authority of one who had said all that was needed. I will stay in town tonight. Think on these matters. I return to the council tomorrow. As the elder's truck disappeared down the drive, Jack and Whitefeather stood side by side, the wooden staff he had left leaning against the porch, a symbol of authority, of connection to her people, and of decisions yet to be made. October painted the cottonwoods along the arroyo in brilliant gold, their leaves shimmering in the autumn light. Whitefeather's pregnancy had progressed to a noticeable roundness that she carried with serene dignity. The visit from Elder Running Bear 3 months earlier had left decisions unmade, a future still being shaped by daily choices, rather than declarations in the storage shed behind the house. Whitefeather knelt over a half-finished wooden frame, her fingers working strips of supple deer hide through small holes. What are you making? Elena asked, watching with fascination. A cradle board. Whitefeather guided the girl's hand to feel the curved wood. Apache babies are carried this way, close to their mother's heart, but secure against the world. For my brother or sister? Elena's acceptance of the pregnancy had been immediate and enthusiastic. Yes, Whitefeather smiled. Your father helped me find the right wood. I've been drying and curing the hide for weeks. Jack appeared in the doorway, arms laden with firewood. Getting colder earlier than usual this year. Winter's coming fast. Their eyes met over Elena's head, shared awareness of all that needed to be done before snow reached the high desert. The ranch required winterizing pipes wrapped, livestock moved to sheltered pastures, repairs completed while the weather held. Elena, go help Dad with that wood, Whitefeather suggested. I'll be in soon to start dinner. As they worked through the afternoon jack on the roof clearing gutters, Whitefeather and Elena in the garden harvesting the last vegetables, a rhythm had settled between them, a family choreography that felt both new and ancient. That evening, after Elena was asleep, Jack joined Whitefeather on the porch. Her hands continued working on the cradle board, even in the dim light, muscle memory guiding what her eyes could barely see. Doc Wilson says everything looks good, Jack said, referring to their prenatal visit earlier that week. Baby's growing right on schedule. Whitefeather nodded. The child is strong. I can feel it. He said January, probably. Smack in the middle of the worst weather. The child will come when it is ready. Whitefeather set aside her handwork. Jack, we must speak of what happens after. He'd been expecting this conversation, dreading it and needing it in equal measure. Running Bear's visit had left too many questions hanging between them. "I've been thinking," Jack began, his voice careful. "We could make this official. Get married before the baby comes." White Feather's expression remained thoughtful. "In your church? With your God as witness? If that's what you want. Or however you'd prefer." Jack ran a hand through his hair. "I just thought for the baby's sake, and legally, in my tradition. Two people who choose to walk together need no outside approval," White Feather said gently. "The commitment is between them and the Creator. Is that what you want? To walk together?" Jack asked, the question carrying more weight than its simple words suggested. White Feather was silent for a long moment. "I have thought much about running." Bear's words, about being a bridge between worlds. Her hand rested on her growing belly. "This child will be both Navarro and Apache, neither fully one nor the other. Like you and me, stuck between communities," Jack observed. "Perhaps not stuck, perhaps exactly where we are meant to be." White Feather turned to face him fully. "I will not return permanently to the reservation, Jack. My place is here now, with you and Elena and our child. But I must still honor my duty as a healer to my people." Relief washed through Jack. "You could visit the reservation regularly. Teach healing ways, like Running Bear suggested." She nodded. "And bring our child to learn the old songs, the traditions. So, about getting married?" Jack began again. White Feather's lips curved in a rare, full smile. "If it would ease your heart, Jack Navarro, we can speak vows before your God and my ancestors both." Jack took her hand, his throat suddenly tight with emotion. "I'd like that. A ceremony that honors both our traditions." "A bridge," White Feather agreed softly. The autumn night deepened around them, stars emerging in the vast New Mexico sky. Inside the house, Elena slept peacefully, her dream catcher moving gently in the breeze from the half-open window. In the shed, the cradle board waited, a tangible symbol of the future they were crafting together, not fully belonging to either world, but creating something new between them. "January," Jack murmured, his hand joining hers over their growing child. "We should be ready by then." White Feather leaned against his shoulder. "Some things cannot be fully prepared for, only welcomed when they arrive." January arrived with the worst blizzard in 20 years. Snow piled in drifts against the ranch house, wind howling across the high desert like a living thing. 3 days into the storm, the phone lines went down. By the 4th day, the generator was struggling, and Jack had retreated to the living room where he maintained a constant fire in the hearth. White Feather moved slowly around the kitchen, her heavily pregnant form making navigation difficult in the small space. She winced suddenly, one hand bracing against the counter. "Another one?" Jack asked, concern etching his features. "Just practice contractions," she assured him. "The baby is not ready yet." But as the day wore on, the pains grew more regular. By evening, White Feather could no longer deny what was happening. "The baby is coming," she told Jack as Elena helped her to the sofa. "Earlier than we expected." Jack's face paled. "We need to get you to the hospital." "Look outside," White Feather said calmly. "The roads are impassable." It was true. Even Jack's sturdy truck couldn't navigate the 3-foot snowdrifts between the ranch and town. They were completely isolated. "I'll radio for help," Jack decided, moving to the emergency CB radio he kept for ranch emergencies, while he frantically tried to reach anyone who might be listening. Elena sat beside White Feather, holding her hand through each contraction. The girl's face was solemn but unafraid. "Is the baby really coming tonight?" she asked. White Feather nodded, her breathing measured. "Your brother or sister has chosen a powerful night to arrive. In our tradition, children born during storms are believed to carry special strength," Jack returned, his expression grim. "Got through to Sheriff Rivera. Roads are closed countywide. No emergency vehicles can get through until morning at the earliest. Then we will birth this child ourselves, Whitefeather said with remarkable composure. I have attended many births. I know what must be done. Jack ran a hand through his hair, clearly terrified. Whitefeather, if something goes wrong, women have been having babies without hospitals for thousands of years. She reached for his hand. I need clean towels, hot water, and your courage, Jack Navarro. As the night deepened and the storm raged, Whitefeather directed their preparations. The living room became a birthing space. Clean sheets spread before the fire. Water boiled on the wood stove. Elena tasked with keeping track of the time between contractions. During a moment of respite between pains, Whitefeather beckoned Jack. Closer. There is something I must ask of you. From around her neck, she removed a leather cord that held a small silver key. In my things, there is a wooden box. Bring it to me. Jack found the intricately carved box among Whitefeather's few possessions. Inside was a small buckskin pouch, and wrapped in red cloth, an old rifle cartridge that had been transformed into a protective amulet with beads and horsehair. My father's, Whitefeather explained through gritted teeth as another contraction began. For protection, Jack understood immediately. Though she hadn't said it aloud, Whitefeather was preparing for the possibility that she might not survive the birth. She was ensuring her child would have something of her family's protection. You're going to be fine, he insisted, clasping her hand. Both of you. The hours passed in a blur of pain and focused activity. Near midnight, Whitefeather's waters broke. The contractions intensified, coming faster, harder. Jack marveled at her strength, at the ancient knowledge that guided her through each stage of labor. Elena, Whitefeather gasped between contractions. You must be brave now. Your father will need your help. The girl nodded solemnly, far older than her 9 years in this moment thought, as Whitefeather began to push. A new sound cut through the storm's howl, the distant rumble of engines. Jack went to the window, squinting through frost-covered glass. Headlights, at least 3 vehicles, were making their way up the long drive. Someone's coming, he reported, relief flooding him. Must be Tom with help. But Whitefeather's face showed no relief. Jack, she said, her voice urgent despite her exhaustion. Your rifle. He stared at her, uncomprehending, and saw the fear in her eyes. Grabbing his binoculars, he focused on the approaching vehicles. Not the sheriff's cruiser, or an ambulance, but pickup trucks he recognized, the Cotters and Randalls, among others. Stay with her, he instructed Elena, moving quickly to the gun cabinet. The hunting rifle had been his father's, seldom used except for the occasional coyote threatening the livestock. Tonight, it might serve a different purpose as Whitefeather's. Labor intensified, and strangers approached through the storm. Jack chambered around and positioned himself at the front window, prepared to protect his family by any means necessary. The truck stopped 50 yards from the house, headlights cutting through the swirling snow. Jack stood at the window, rifle ready but not yet visible, watching as 5 men emerged, Mike Cotter in the lead. Jack! Whitefeather's cry drew him back to her side. The baby, it's coming now. Torn between the imminent birth and the approaching threat, Jack made his decision. Elena, stay with Whitefeather. Remember what she showed you. The girl nodded bravely, taking the position at Whitefeather's side. Jack pressed a quick kiss to Whitefeather's forehead before moving to the door, rifle in hand. He stepped onto the porch as the men reached the bottom step, their breath clouding in the frigid air. Jack raised the rifle just enough to make its presence clear. That's far enough, he called over the wind. Sheriff Rivera's voice came from behind the group. Stand down, Jack. I'm here too. Tom emerged from the darkness, his cruiser barely visible through the snow. Got your radio call. Came as soon as I could. Why are they here? Jack demanded, Gesturing to the Cotter brothers and their friends, Mike Cotter stepped forward. Heard on the scanner you've got a woman in labor. Figured you'd need help getting to the hospital. Jack's suspicion must have shown clearly, because Tom added, "It's true, Jack. They were at the diner when the call came in. They've got the only vehicles in town that can handle these drifts." From inside the house came Ilana's panicked voice. "Dad, the baby's coming right now." Jack's focus splintered. White Feather needed him, but he couldn't leave these men outside, their intentions still unclear. "Anyone who enters this house shows respect," he warned, lowering the rifle slightly. "This is my family." Something in his tone, the fierce protection of a father, the determination of a man who would not be moved, seemed to reach even Mike. Cotter, who nodded grudgingly, inside. They found White Feather in the final stages of labor, Elena supporting her shoulders, speaking encouragement with a child's straightforward faith. The men hung back awkwardly, hats in hands, while Sheriff Rivera knelt beside the makeshift birthing bed. "Ambulance can't get through for hours yet," he told Jack. "But I've got some medical training from the Army." Jack reclaimed his place at White Feather's side, taking her hand. "You've got this," he murmured. "We're all here with you." With a final powerful push and a cry that seemed to rise above the storm's howl, White Feather delivered their son into the world. The baby's first angry wail filled the room, strong and insistent. "A boy," Jack whispered, tears streaming unchecked down his face. "Elena, you have a brother." Sheriff Rivera efficiently helped with the afterbirth, while Jack cleaned the newborn with the towels they'd prepared. The Cotter brothers and their friends stood transfixed by the raw power of the moment, life emerging against all odds in the midst of the storm. As Jack placed the swaddled infant in White Feather's arms, she looked beyond him to the gathered men, her eyes clear despite her exhaustion. "You came seeking confrontation," she said, her voice carrying unexpected strength, "but you have instead witnessed new life. In my tradition, this makes you part of our circle." The men shifted uncomfortably, Mike Cotter's weathered face conflicted. "My son will be both Apache and Navarro," White Feather continued. "He will walk in two worlds, needing wisdom from both to find his path. Would you deny him half his heritage, half his strength?" Before anyone could respond, the sound of another vehicle approaching broke the tense silence. Sheriff Rivera moved to the window. "It's a reservation truck," he reported. "Two people coming up the drive." Jack helped White Feather sit up straighter. As elder Running Bear entered, followed by a younger Apache woman carrying a medicine bundle. The elder took in the scene, White Feather with her newborn, Jack and Elena beside her, the townsman standing awkwardly against the wall. "We felt the child's spirit join us," Running Bear said simply, "even through the storm." He approached the newborn, placing a gnarled hand gently on the baby's head. "This child belongs to both worlds." What followed was unlike anything the town of Cooper's Crossing had ever witnessed. As dawn broke through the clouds and the storm finally subsided, White Feather and Running Bear led a blessing ceremony for the infant that drew from Apache tradition. Then, with equal reverence, Jack recited the Catholic baptismal prayer his grandmother had taught him, Elena sprinkling water from White Feather's special clay pot onto the baby's forehead. "His name is Daniel," White Feather announced, "and in Apache, Aguila Eagle, for he was born on wings of the storm." "Daniel Aguila Navarro," Jack confirmed, his hand on his son's head. Mike Cotter, who had watched the ceremony in silence, finally spoke. "My grandfather would roll in his grave seeing this." He paused, then added grudgingly, "But I reckon he was wrong about some things." The first light of morning streamed through the windows, illuminating the improbable gathering, Apache. Elders and town prejudice, new life and old hatreds, coming together in the presence of a child who embodied possibility rather than division. 1 year later, The cottonwoods along the arroyo once again blazed gold against the cerulean New Mexico sky. The Navarro ranch had transformed irrigation. Ditches now followed the contours of the land in patterns. White Feather had designed based on ancient Apache water harvesting techniques. The cattle were healthier, grazing in a rotation that allowed the native grasses to recover. Maria's garden had expanded, now supplying not only the family, but also the small farmers market. White Feather had helped organize on the reservation. Jack stood on the porch, watching Elena chase after a toddling Daniel, who squealed with delight as he navigated the yard on sturdy legs. At 1-year-old, he was the perfect blend of his parents' Jack's strong build and White Feather's deep, thoughtful eyes. "He walks like you," White Feather said, joining Jack on the porch. "Determined to reach his destination, no matter what stands in his way." Jack smiled, slipping an arm around her waist. Got his mother's curiosity, though. Nothing escapes his notice. They had married the previous spring twice, actually. First, in a traditional Apache ceremony on reservation land, with Running Bear officiating and many from the Mescalero band attending. Then, a week later, in the small Catholic church in Cooper's Crossing, where Father Martinez blessed their union, while Elena beamed from the front pew, Daniel sleeping peacefully in a traditional cradleboard, decorated with symbols from both their heritages. Not everyone had accepted them, of course. Some reservation elders still regarded Jack with suspicion when White Feather brought Daniel for his monthly visits to learn Apache songs and stories. A few townspeople still crossed the street when they saw White Feather coming, but others had surprised them with their openness. Mike Cotter, improbably, had become something of an ally. After witnessing Daniel's birth and blessing, something had shifted in the man. When spring roundup came, he'd shown up with his brothers to help, gruffly explaining that neighbors look out for each other, regardless. Sheriff Rivera pulled into the drive right on time for the gathering they'd planned. He carried a carefully wrapped package, which he presented to Daniel with a wink. "For the birthday boy," he said, "though he might need to grow into it." Inside was a small handcrafted saddle. "My grandfather made saddles," Tom explained. "Taught me a little before he passed. Figured every Navarro should have his own." Others arrived throughout the afternoon. Mrs. Bentley and her husband from the school, Doc Wilson and his wife, a few ranching families who gradually warmed to the unorthodox family. From the reservation came Running Bear, and several families whose children White Feather had helped heal during her twice-weekly visits as a practicing medicine woman. The two communities mingled somewhat awkwardly at first, but the barriers softened as the afternoon progressed. Elena proudly showed her school friends the traditional hoop game White Feather had taught her, while Jack discussed sustainable grazing practices with both Apache elders and local ranchers. As sunset approached, everyone gathered beneath the cottonwoods by the arroyo, where Jack had found White Feather that stormy day nearly 2 years before. Elena had insisted on this location for her brother's birthday celebration, understanding intuitively its significance to their family story. Jack stepped forward, Daniel on his hip. "Before we eat, White Feather and I want to thank you all for coming. This spot is special to us. It's where our family began, though we didn't know it then." White Feather joined them, her hand resting on Elena's shoulder. "In Apache tradition, we believe that places hold memory, that the land itself witnesses our stories. This arroyo has seen struggle and rescue, separation and coming together." From Mrs. Bentley's husband came a traditional Navajo blessing song, followed by Mrs. Gonzalez leading everyone in "Happy Birthday," as a cake was presented with a single candle. As Jack helped Daniel blow out the flame, Sheriff Rivera captured the moment with his camera, the four of them framed by golden cottonwood leaves, their faces illuminated by the warm light of early evening. A family created not by convention, but by choice, courage, and love. The photograph would stand on their mantel for decades to come, marking the moment when what had begun as rescue became redemption. When two people from different worlds stopped trying to fit into existing spaces and instead created. Something new. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the children slept, Jack and Whitefeather returned to the porch, gazing up at stars that had witnessed countless human stories across the centuries. "I never expected this life," Jack admitted softly. Whitefeather's hand found his in the darkness. "The best journeys are those we cannot foresee." Above them, the stars wheeled in ancient patterns, indifferent to human divisions of reservation. And town, Apache and white. The land endured, the arroyo waited for the next rain, and within the ranch house, a family slept whole and healing, bridging worlds with every breath.